I was nearing the edge of the Zenna marshes when the sound began. A metallic clatter, irregular, distant, like someone dragging a chain across loose cobblestones. I stopped mid-step. The path ahead was moonlit and narrow, hemmed by weeping willows and crumbling fence posts. The farms behind me were long out of earshot. Only frogs croaked in the distance, and something else, the sound of water, agitated, as if something had just slipped beneath its surface. Then came the voice. Not a word, not even a scream, just a rasping breath that wasn't mine, brushing close to my ear. I turned. Nothing. Not even wind. I started walking faster. And then I heard it again, closer now. The rattle of that infernal chain. My lungs tightened. I had heard stories, tavern mutterings about a thing that waits in the bridges and within hollow trees, something that climbs your back when you're alone at night. They called it Kludde. But I hadn't believed it. Not until the weight fell across my shoulders like a sodden cloak. Cold hands, clawed and unseen, gripped the sides of my neck. I stumbled forward with a cry, unable to shrug it off. And then, right next to my ear, I could feel its foul, slavering breath on my skin. When we think cryptids, we often think of the American Appalachians, or remote mountains in Tibet, or the jungles of South America or Africa. However, the Old World, that is continental Europe, also has its share of mysterious creatures and ghouls that go bump in the night. In the mists and riverlands of my own home country, Belgium, particularly in the Flemish countryside, there lingers a name spoken in warning, half serious and half feared. Kludde. Not a ghost, nor a beast, nor quite a demon, Kludde is something stranger. A folkloric hybrid that shifts its shape and mood with the region and century. Sometimes it's a massive black hound, upright on its hind legs. Sometimes it's a cat, pitiful and beguiling. Elsewhere, it flies over rooftops as a great shadowed bird, calling its name with every wing beat. So, like a lot of things in Belgium, we all acknowledge it's there, but we can't really find a consensus on it. For the most part, Kludde is described as a large, black, shaggy dog, somewhere in the size between a dog and a wolf. In most depictions, it has large black wings, either feathered or leathery. Its eyes would glow in the dark and have an uncanny intelligence to them. In every form it takes, it's always accompanied by a large chain, sometimes wrapped around it, sometimes with a large ball at the end, but always fastened to its left hind ankle. It is a shapeshifter, it can fly, and it has the ability to turn invisible when stalking its prey. Kludde is said to wait for travelers on empty roads, especially at night. It chooses the vulnerable, the isolated, and the unguarded. And once it has chosen its victim, it leaps onto their back, into their minds, across their threshold, and it will not leave them until dawn. Or not at all. Stories vary from village to village. In some, Kludde is a trickster. In others, he is a tormentor and even a killer. But all agree on a few chilling details. The rattling chain it must wear around its ankle, the whisper or call that announces its presence, and the way it grows heavier, almost unbearably so, the longer you carry it. Some believe the creature's very name, Kludde, is not a word, but an imitation of the call it makes as it flies overhead, a guttural, rhythmic cry echoing from above, like some medieval Pokemon calling its own name. Is it a folkloric relic of Belgium's past? A warning made flesh for those who wander off the safe path? An hallucination in a country that's famous for having a boatload of different strong beers that rival Germany's in taste and quality? Or something older still, hiding in the hollows and waterways, wearing fear like a mask? Today, we follow the echoes of that chain and trace the many faces of Kludde. Welcome back to Mythos Insights. Now, to understand Kludde, we must first understand the land that bore it. And here, I'll be honest, I'm not going to actually describe Belgium's history because that would be a total shit show. But I'd rather wax poetically about my home country and describe it as such. The low, wet regions of Flanders and southern Brabant are ancient. They're textured by peat bogs, dense copses of trees, canals, and centuries of oral tradition. Situated in the northern half of Belgium, the region has always been inhabited and gave rise to a people who are hardy and resourceful, either changing the land to their needs or living alongside it and making do. It's a land where simple, hard-working folk were cultivated, and they made a name for themselves in medieval Europe. The culture, art, stories, and their painting spread across many surrounding nations for its unique style and high quality. The folklore here is earthy and tactile, rooted in lived experience and built up across generations. As a piece of swampy or forested land, it has changed hands from one foreign nation to another over many centuries. The people of Flanders and southern Brabant were rather content with focusing on their daily lives and just getting on with it. Something that's still reflected in today's society, as I'm sure that if the world would end, Belgium would simply continue existing, oblivious to it all, or just too stubborn to go along with it. Now, a small tangent. The region that today is referred to as Flanders is actually a combination of the historical regions of Flanders, made up of the provinces East and West Flanders, and southern Brabant, made up of the provinces of Antwerp, Limburg, and Brabant. And those two make up the entire northern part of Belgium. For ease of use, I'll be referring to both of these historical regions in this video as Flanders from now on. Just know that I refer to the current region of Flanders with that name, not just historical Flanders as in East and West Flanders, it's the whole of Flanders. Now, again, simple farmers and skilled artisans that the Flemish were, they lived a life full of folklore and devout religion. Every week there was a fair or a festival somewhere, and any and all reason to celebrate life, love, and food was as good as any. Eventually, when the medieval times passed and the land found itself in the shadow of rising factories and vanishing woodlands, the old spirits in this culture also retreated, but not completely. Kludde is one of those spirits that remained. Now, the earliest mentions of Kludde predate any written record, as it first appeared in oral tales passed between villagers in Dendermonde, Wichelen, Zemst, and Schelle. These are towns nestled along the rivers Scheldt and the Zenne. The lands around these rivers are often waterlogged, swampy, where the air is often heavy with mist, and where a night journey can still feel like you're crossing into another world. Even to this day, vast regions in Flanders are still very agrarian, so back in the day it would be even more so, with just open fields and grasslands or even forests stretching far in between small villages, with the houses huddled around local churches or sparse farms dotting the landscape. Very often, you can wake up to find a thick fog is hanging all over the place, obscuring much of the otherwise open landscape, and turning it quite eerie in turn. It's not even unheard of that mist or fog just rises over the fields at a moment's notice, even during the day. The fact that much of Flanders and southern Brabant still have very visible traces of late medieval infrastructure and terrain really pulls you back into the distant past at times. In such terrain, it's not difficult to imagine shadowy forms lurking behind alder trees or squatting beneath moss-choked bridges. Now, Local variants of Kludde's legend are also around. For example, in the city of Aalst, the creature is called Kludde instead, and he is believed to dwell in the waters of the river Dender. Or at least it did, until the townsfolk drove it along the river toward Dendermonde, a nearby city with which Aalst has allegedly feuded for centuries. I mean, nothing like sicking a shape-shifting demon dog on your neighbors, right? In the legend of Kludde, there are no single key figures. There are no named saints or sorcerers or heroes or kings who encounter or fight it. There are no papal bulls or witch trial documents that condemn it. It's only a handful of village tales and anecdotal heroes that stand out. You could say, from the beginning, that Kludde is just a fabrication of the church, to scare sinners and ne'er-do-wells onto the straight and narrow. But there's no single priest or scholar behind the tale. No one invented Kludde. Instead, Kludde belongs to the folk consciousness of a place shaped by damp woods, long winters, and a profound intimacy with death and danger. It is a cryptid made up of whispers, not records, a shapeshifter born from generational dread. And this is what really helps the story of Kludde. Since he is a story that has seen little to no attention from records and scholars, only living in the tales of simple folk, his actions in history are beginning to fade in this ever more documented era. Where my parents, and especially my grandparents, still knew of Kludde, current youngsters are completely oblivious of his existence. But that is to be expected. We don't let our youngsters go out at night in the fields and back roads unsupervised anymore. Like normal. They don't encounter him. And there's certainly no Minecraft YouTuber talking about him or TikTok set to some catchy pop song being made about him. Yet, despite the lack of centralized law, the traditions persist. The ringing of Kludde's chain in the silence, its affinity for night roads and solitary wanderers, its shifting forms, and its single-minded obsession with riding the backs of the living and tormenting them until the very end. But what did Kludde actually do? I will tell you. The following set of stories of Kludde are not organized chronologically. They are not documented in a single historical record or chronicle. Instead, they are scattered. They are fragments of oral testimony, village legend, and remembered fear. And though they differ in setting and tone, their rhythm is constant, as you'll see. Night falls, a traveler strays alone, and something leaps at them, often with dire consequences. Now, for the first story, it takes place in the marshes near Zemst. A farmer's son takes a shortcut home after a late errand to a nearby village. He's tired, but content to get back home. The road cuts past the edges of the old moorland, where fog pools thick over shallow water. There is not a sound, except for the occasional croak of frogs, chirping of crickets, and splash of fish. Yet, as he passes a crossroads on the abandoned moonlit road, he hears something. A faint metal ringing, like the soft rattling of links in a chain. And then, the sound of his footsteps take on a curious echo. It's like the sound of his steps are strangely out of sync with his actual gait, echoing again. He suddenly realizes the echo is from another set of feet, and it's close behind him. He turns to face it, but sees nothing. And then a heavy thud against his back. He stumbles, nearly falling. The weight is sudden and suffocating, with a feeling of strangulation around his neck, though he can see no one or nothing. His legs tremble and strain to keep upright, under a weight as if they're suddenly carrying two men. Dazed and confused, his legs almost buckling beneath him, he tries to get to safety as soon as possible. All night, he walks, stumbles on, unable to stop, unable to speak. And when he finally reaches his family's threshold and opens the door, the weight vanishes as quickly as it appeared. When confronting the boy with his tardy arrival, his father noticed that his son looked years older than he did the day before. And not gonna lie, I've also come home early in the morning looking and feeling like I've aged a decade after going out and binge drinking. So, now for the second story, in Dilbeek, the creature is said to have disguised itself as a stray black cat. During a thunderstorm, a kind-hearted woman noticed a small black cat in distress. The animal seemed lost and confused by the downpour, mewing plaintively the whole time. And just like most people nowadays, she couldn't ignore the plight of the little creature, and she took the animal in from the roadside. However, the moment she crossed the threshold of her home, the cat started hissing, spitting and growling, and it began to grow, its limbs elongating, fur slouching away in wet patches, eyes widening into something entirely inhuman, which is logical because it's a cat. The villagers found the woman afterwards wandering around town, muttering and soaked throughout, unable to remember what happened the night before or where she had gone, apart from the faint reminiscence of hearing the rattling of chains. When eventually memories of taking in the black cat started to return to her, some villagers accompanied her back to her house to investigate. And as they threw open the door, they saw that the entire house was in a state of chaos. Chairs were thrown about, the table was overturned, ceramics were shattered on the ground, and deep claw marks were gouged in the floorboards. Another story. In Mechelen, along the wooded trail now known as the Kludde, wonder why, there is a story still told by the older villagers, one that begins on a summer night thick with mist and the hum of insects. A young man, no more than 17, had stayed late helping at a farmstead just beyond the river. He was walking home through the low fields, barns and willow trees dark against the starlit sky. He was halfway down the path when he heard it. First, just a flutter, like wings disturbing the still air. Then came the unmistakable metal ringing, harsh and rhythmic, trailing from somewhere above. He stopped, peering upward into the darkness, and there he saw it. A bird or something like it, massive, blacker than the night behind it, with wings broad as a wagon, circling above the rooftops of nearby farms in slow, deliberate passes. And as it glided overhead, roof tiles trembled. After a few passes, some of the roof tiles from the farms fell and shattered on the ground. The horses reared in their stables, dogs were starting to howl, chickens screamed, however that might sound, and scattered into the brush. The boy ran, of course. By morning, some of the farm's animals were found broken in their pens. Broken. 2 goats with their spines twisted, a sow just dead from shock, her eyes still wide with fear. But there were no tracks, there was no blood, just loose feathers scattered across the yard, oversized feathers, oily and black. The elders of the village told him not to speak of it too loudly, not out of disbelief, but fear that saying the name of the culprit too often might call the thing back. Now, as you can deduce from the previous stories, there are no consistent reports of a physical creature with a set form, like one might expect from modern cryptozoology. Now, the creature in these stories, as you've heard, had 3 different shapes. Either it was without shape, like in the first one, as in it was invisible, it couldn't be described. In the second one, it's a very defined shape, like it was a cat, or in the third story, it was a bird. And then, like in the second story, it has its mythical shape, which is this elongated, out of proportion kind of dog with wings and whatever you want. Yet, despite these inconsistencies in shape, he was always identified as the same creature, Kludde, which means that Kludde is considered to be more a phenomenon than an actual beast. Just fear, the idea of fear, giving form. And yet, despite what it represents as the concept of fear, there are stories of people resisting it. For example, in the next tale. In the village of Schelle, there lived a butcher and his family in a modest house near the edge of the woods, not far from the river Dijle's slow waters. For weeks, something had haunted their nights. It always began the same way. A rattling at the doorstep, not like the knock of a hand, but the uneven clink of metal dragging across stone. And then came the sounds on the roof, scrapes and footsteps. Once, a shadow passed the window, though no torch or figure followed it. The butcher's wife stopped sleeping. Their youngest son refused to leave his bed after sunset. It was the chain that gave it away. The villagers all knew the stories, so did the butcher. Night after night, the shadow returned, sometimes scratching at the walls, sometimes howling in the hedgerow, always with that chain, always just out of reach, always just out of sight. The family lived in quiet terror, too afraid to speak of it aloud, too proud to ask the local priest for help. But on the seventh night, when the rattling came again, something in the butcher finally snapped. He waited by the door with his cleaver in hand, heart pounding like a drum. The sound of the chain drew ever closer, and the footsteps halted just beyond the threshold. And then the butcher flung the door wide open. According to him, standing there was a figure, its outline wrong in every way, its eyes too bright and too intelligent. The butcher didn't pause or take too much time, but he instantly drove the blade straight into the thing's gut. And it screamed. An inhuman cry, not even animalistic in nature, but something deeper, like iron tearing through wood. The figure turned away, chain lashing wildly, and fled into the darkness between the trees. It never returned to haunt that butcher again. And though the butcher never spoke much about that night again, neighbors say he sharpened his cleaver a bit more often after that. Which, is a good thing. Proper knife maintenance is what you'd expect from a butcher. Now, another story from someone who defied Kludde is from Wichelen. They still speak of the victim in question, though few remember her name, only that she lived alone at the edge of the fields, in a cottage shaded by ash trees and overgrown with elderflowers. Some called her cunning, others wise, others said worse things about her. But she knew herbs and how to read clouds, and she knew when to lock your doors before the fog came crawling low over the river. One evening, she was returning late from the woods, her apron full of nettle and tansy. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, and a pale, watery moon hung behind the branches. The road ahead was silent, and then came that sound. Again, a metallic rattle, faint but certain, the unmistakable drag of a chain through grass and gravel. She slowed, she listened. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. Stories are one thing. Hearing the sound is another. And then it dropped. From the tree line, from the mist, from the blackness between stars, it leapt onto her back, long limbs wrapping around her shoulders, claws scraping against her apron. The chain swung and slapped her in the thighs and arms. She gasped, staggered, but did not fall. She had prepared for this, or something like it. With one hand, she reached into her apron and pulled out a square of cloth, coarse and herbal-scented, torn from an old rag she used to wrap poultices. And with a sudden twist of her body, she shoved it backward into the thing's mouth. Now, Kludde reared back in shock. For just a moment, he became visible, and she could see that it was part dog, part man, and also made up of smoke. Its eyes were wide with fury. Its mouth was stretching open in a snarl too large for its face. But it could not bite down. It gagged, it reeled and thrashed with that cloth stuck between its teeth, and then vanished. The chain clattered to nothing. Then the woman stumbled home, shaking but alive. By morning, the village buzzed with unease. One of the young farmhands, known to loiter near the woman's cottage, had suddenly taken ill. He was feverish, delirious, and when the old doctor checked his mouth, he found fibers wedged between the boy's teeth. Coarse, herbal-scented fabric, damp and chewed nearly to threads. The cunning woman said nothing, neither did the boy, but they all knew what happened. Now you could say, what is the big deal with Kludde? He seems to be doing a lot of scaring, but not actually killing. Well, not every story has a triumphant ending. This last story is told in Breendonk, and it's quite grim. It's about a man who walked home one night and barely lived to cross the threshold, and didn't live long beyond it. He was a tradesman, known in the village, though not especially well. One of those solitary types who kept to himself, often traveling between hamlets by foot, even after dark. That night, he had lingered too long over supper in a nearby inn. The road home cut through open fields, and then a strip of woodland where the wind never quite reached the ground. It was just past midnight when he heard the sound behind him. Again, metal, faint and dragging, and then came the footsteps. Soft at first, but strangely offbeat, as if someone were walking in time with him, but always just half a pace behind. He stopped, so did they. He turned, but there was nothing. And then came the pressure, sudden, crushing, and invisible, as if something had leapt onto his back. His knees buckled, but he didn't fall. He couldn't for some reason. He couldn't speak either. Every breath that he took felt like it was stolen right out of his mouth. He pressed on, step by agonizing step, through the dark, and with each mile, the weight grew worse. What began as a burden became like an anchor. His spine ached, his vision blurred. He clutched at his chest as if to hold his heart in place, and by the time he stumbled into his yard and forced the door open, his face was white as chalk. He collapsed right there across the floorboards. His wife screamed. The doctor came, but it was too late. The man had already passed. There were no wounds on his body, no broken bones, only the bruising, black and sunken across his shoulders and neck, as if clawed hands had gripped him all night long and refused to let go. No thief had touched him, no beast had chased him, but the old women in town knew. They shook their heads, crossed themselves, and said the same name: Kludde. You might have noticed, but there are no named victims in these tales. There are also no recovered artifacts. There are no records. But still, these stories endure. They are shared in all dialects. They are half laughed, half believed. But each of them is a variation of a grim ritual, a road at night, a sound of chains, a shadow behind you, and then the crushing weight of Kludde. Unlike many legends of the supernatural, Kludde leaves behind no ossified relics, no ancient altars, no sacred symbols etched into chapel stone. His traces are ephemeral, felt more in bruises and in whispers than in any form that might rest in a museum case. And yet, for a creature of myth, there are recurring physical elements, details that bleed across borders and generations, difficult to dismiss entirely. The most distinctive of these is its chain. In nearly every telling, Kludde is burdened with a chain around his left ankle that announces its presence. It's not a choice or decoration, but seen as a punishment for the being, something he must wear. It rattles as he walks or flies, a sort of forewarning to the attentive. To hear it is to know you're no longer alone on the road, and when the sound draws near, there is no hope of escape, only the futile sprint towards your destination as Kludde closes the distance, faster than any man can run. But now you might be asking, if he's not wearing that chain voluntarily, then who chained him? Well, some believe it is a mark of divine punishment, a curse laid upon Kludde by some forgotten saint, a hermit, or maybe even a higher force. In many folkloric traditions, a truly malevolent entity must first announce itself before it can attack anyone. The chain in this reading is a forced herald, a binding charm placed upon him to ensure that those who listen carefully might yet survive. He is cursed to betray his own presence, shackled not just physically but in his very purpose. Others say the chain is a residue of a violent end, that Kludde, if he was ever human, met his human death in irons, hanged or drowned, shackled like a criminal, cast into some black river at the edge of the woods. The chain then is not a punishment, but a birthmark of the dead, a reminder that whatever he is now was once a man left to rot in chains, and now walks with that sentence rattling at his heels. Still others see the chain as a safeguard, not for him but for us, like tying a bell around the neck of a predator or hanging chimes from the eaves to ward off spirits. The chain may have been placed on Kludde by older magic, perhaps folk magic or a hero, meant to slow him down, to give us just enough warning if you're quick, clever, or devout to get away. It's a last-minute grace woven into the nightmare. And suddenly I'm wearing a different shirt and I'm shaven and it's a different time of day. Okay, in all honesty, I had a couple of technical mishaps with the recording, so I only noticed that after I've taken down everything for recording, and it's the next day, and I'm going to have to re-record the second part of this entire episode, just so you know, so don't worry about it, you're not seeing things. And then there's the most unsettling theory of all, that Kludde is not his own master, that the chain is a tether, not a warning, that he is bound to serve, and if so, he rides not out of malice, but out of a compulsion. He's a creature sent by something older, crueler, and entirely unseen. A hunter on a leash, and you were never meant to notice that he was on a leash until it drags across the gravel or the grass. Though no physical chain has ever been recovered or presented, the consistency of that detail across the regions from Hemiksen to Zems to Wichelen suggests a shared origin at least. Now, there's also the weight, perhaps the most terrifying and deadly aspect to all of the Kludde encounters. Survivors, when they are survivors, describe it as sudden and suffocating, an invisible pressure that crashes down upon the shoulders and clings there, immovable. Some say it feels like carrying a bundle of wet firewood. Others describe the sensation as being pressed beneath a soaked animal carcass, cold, limp, and yet still breathing. Also, that implies that those people know what it's like to be under a dead animal carcass, which makes you wonder. But the weight they're experiencing is not static. It grows, it becomes more heavy. What begins as a burden becomes like a sentence. With every step, Kludde seems to dig deeper into the spine, pressing against nerves, stealing breath, tightening his grip around the throat and chest. It's not just heaviness, it's like exhaustion-made flesh, a cruel and deliberate mimicry of fatigue. In Braindong's telling, the weight increases until the victim's knees give out, until his lungs collapse under the pressure, until his body simply breaks. Some collapse on their doorstep, barely able to cross the threshold before death claims them. Others are found later, bruised and senseless, muttering nonsense, shoulders blackened where invisible claws once gripped them. The injuries left behind are strangely specific. The most common are these bruises across the upper back and collarbones, as though gripped tightly by something with human-like hands. Not animal mauling, no tearing, no bite marks, just imprints, like someone had ridden them piggyback for hours. There are cases of deep muscle bruising, even burst capillaries around the neck, as if from strangulation or prolonged compression. Some bear claw-like abrasions, usually shallow, but precise, as though done with intention to harm rather than in a frenzy. But why? Why the weight? What does Kludde gain from being carried around? Now, in some interpretations, the ride itself is not the torment, but it's a form of sustenance for Kludde. Kludde drains you. He saps energy, he saps autonomy, your identity. The longer he rides you, the weaker the victim becomes. It may be that he feeds not on blood or bone, but on fear, on submission, on the slow unraveling of a person's will. And in that sense, Kludde could be seen as the progenitor of the typical Belgian politician. Others see the rite as a ritual, as if Kludde is compelled to act out something ancient, an echo of a forgotten punishment, or an inversion of possession, not entering the body like a demon but riding it, controlling it externally instead of internally, reducing a person to a beast of burden. There's another dark interpretation, and that is the one where the rite is symbolic, as a manifestation of guilt or greed for unspoken sin, something the victim carries with them until they either confess to it, collapse under its weight, or simply die. Now, in the end, the bruises fade, the scratches heal, but many who have carried Kludde, those who survive at least, report something far more lasting. A stiffness in the shoulders that never quite goes away. I mean, everyone above 30, am I right? A tendency to wake up breathless, gasping. And the sense, every now and then, that someone is walking behind them, just out of sight. Still, no bones, no body, no footprint that might convince the rational mind has ever been found. What Kludde leaves behind is a residue, not a relic. The terror of weight where there is no form, the sound of iron where there are no shackles. It's the creeping realization that you did not just walk that road alone. Kludde resists easy classification. He is no simple beast skulking at the edge of a village. He's no one-note devil outwitted by a clever priest. Instead, he seems to exist in a sort of liminal state, part spirit, part monster, and part psychological affliction. Theories of him are abound, but none fit without some straining. The first theory is that of a folkloric archetype called the burdened spirit. In many cultures, there exists a recurring figure that afflicts lone travelers or the morally vulnerable. Spirits that ride the backs of the living, weighing them down and sapping their strength, leaving them drained or altered. Kludde fits squarely within this dark tradition. There are others like him, like in German folklore, there is the Alp, a nocturnal entity often described as a demonic goblin or a shadow creature. The Alp visits sleepers at night, creeping onto their chests and sitting there, compressing the lungs, inducing vivid nightmares and sleep paralysis. Victims wake unable to move or breathe, and often report a lingering weight on the chest long after the Alp has vanished. And then there is the mare, the very root of our modern word nightmare. In Nordic and Slavic traditions, the mare is a ghostly or demonic woman who slips into bedrooms at night and sits on the chests of sleepers. I mean, where's the harm in that? Like the Alp, the mare causes intense dreams, a crushing sensation, and a feeling of being watched or stalked by something unseen. She is often associated with guilt, repressed desire, or unconfessed sin. The weight she brings may be as psychological as it is supernatural. And then even in Brazilian folklore, there is the pisadeira, an old, sharp-toothed woman with long fingernails and twisted feet, who lurks on rooftops and waits for people to fall asleep on their backs after a heavy meal, which is oddly specific. She slips into the room and steps onto their chest, paralyzing them with her gaze, inducing suffocation, panic, and sometimes death. Like Kludde, the pisadeira does not need to be invited, she simply arrives as she's hunting you. Though these figures are separated by continents and cultures and even centuries, the pattern is striking. A shadowy presence that mounts the human body, immobilizes it, and feeds, whether on fear, breath, or spirit. They do not kill quickly, they linger around. They remind the victim during the whole process that they are vulnerable even in their most private or protected spaces, like bedrooms or dreams. Even within the Flemish countryside itself, Kludde is not alone. His regional cousins are the Osgaard and the Flodder. They are lesser known but share his core behavior. The Osgaard is also said to leap onto the backs of travelers, forcing them to carry him until exhaustion or collapse. The Flodder, depending on the region, is more mischievous than malevolent, but he's still known to ride humans like beasts, giggling or howling as he does so, having a ton of fun and then just abandoning them. But what unites them all is the experience they induce, a visceral weight, an invasion of autonomy, and a silent message that you are no longer in control of your body. In Kludde, this folkloric archetype takes on a walking, shifting form. He does not wait for dreams or sleep. He comes in the open. He rides in the real world. He is the mare made mobile, the Alp with a chain, the Pisadera of the roadside. What sets Kludde apart is his mobility. His haunting is not confined to one place. He's everywhere. He walks the road. He waits in trees. He actively seeks out prey, then climbs on top of them and ruthlessly rides them into exhaustion. Just like your mom. He's a spiritual echo of real physical danger, fatigue, exposure, and the crushing weight of an isolation during night travel in an era before electric light or cell towers. In this reading, Kludde is the personification of vulnerability, a way for isolated communities to explain disappearances, exhaustion, or even stroke-like symptoms among travelers. It is the story you tell when someone comes home changed or doesn't come home at all. The second theory is that of Christianized demonology. It's another common interpretation that casts Kludde as a demonic being, possibly tied to Christian morality tales. His rattling chains, his nocturnal torment, and his shape-shifting nature all echo traits associated with fallen angels or devils in disguise. In some rural interpretations, Kludde is believed to be a condemned soul, or even the devil himself, sent to test or to punish those wandering from the righteous path. The chain, in this case, as we've said, is more than an auditory flare. It is a symbol of divine punishment, a shackle placed on him by holy forces, forcing him to reveal himself before striking. This aligns with broader Christian folklore, in which evil must often announce itself in some fashion, whether through sound, smell, or deformity, before it can strike at the good. And yet, Kludde does not tempt or corrupt. He does not bargain. He does not speak in riddles or often forbidden knowledge. He simply attacks. So, this has led some folklorists to suggest that Kludde is not a devil at all, but a vestigial pagan spirit, awkwardly absorbed into the Christian worldview. Perhaps once a trickster deity of the woods or waterways, now reduced to a local boogeyman, just trying to cling to fleeting power as modern society is moving on from worshipping the local deities and pagan spirits. Now, linking him further to a sort of chained spirit or punished soul is the idea that still living people could be transformed into a Kludde. In that theory, Kludde is more akin to the story of the werewolf, the curse of lycanthropy, or the loup-garou. Remember the tale in which the medicine woman jammed a piece of cloth in the mouth of Kludde, only to find out the next day that a farmhand has strips of that cloth still stuck in between his teeth. Well, in that regard, Kludde is seen as a curse upon the living, a punishment for past transgressions, one where the victim loses control over their body and then violates others. The third theory is Kludde as a psychological projection. It's a more modern view. Kludde is a shared trauma or cultural projection. The Flemish landscapes, marshy, dim and fog-prone, lend themselves to hypnagogic illusions. A weary traveler, surrounded by croaking frogs and flickering shadows, could easily hallucinate under stress or illness. The belief in Kludde would act as a psychological framework, a catalyst, a cognitive lens through which unexplainable sensations like hearing echoing footsteps, feeling unseen weight, experiencing fear-induced paralysis are processed and viewed. Also, with the landscape being as it is, you'd almost want something like Kludde to just appear and make everything a bit more interesting. This also kind of overlaps with sleep paralysis, but in a waking, ambulatory state, like an open-eyed nightmare, fed by local myth and environmental stress. The folkloric idea of Kludde offers a culturally sanctioned explanation for episodes of intense fear, disorientation, or neurological disturbance. Now, also don't forget, back in the 18th century, medicine and healthcare were not the same as they are now. People had bad eyesight or were hard of hearing. People had mental problems, had a fever or other illness-related issues that they would just ignore. They would accept it as a daily part of life and go about their business. Even though all of these issues are able to alter your perception in very significant and profound ways. Add to that the fear of being alone at night. Well, not being alone at night, but rather not being alone at night. And adrenaline will do the rest to put you in a state of hypertension and heightened awareness. Fight or flight is immediately activated, and your instincts will show you dangers where there are none. Maybe even putting your body under so much stress that it leads to cardiac arrest in older or more unhealthy people, giving rise to the weight and draining abilities of Kludde. The fourth theory is that of the cryptid hypothesis, which states that Kludde is a cryptozoological phenomenon. Kludde is a physical, undiscovered creature misinterpreted through the lens of folklore. Could a rare predatory animal have once stalked rural Flanders, attacking lone travelers and becoming the myth of Kludde over time? Maybe it was a misidentified lynx, an escaped exotic bird, a malformed bear. I mean, in recent years, we've seen the reintroduction of wolves in certain regions in Flanders. And while personally I celebrate the fact that larger animals are spreading again, as it shows that the biodiversity is increasing and nature is healing in some way, other people are in a panic about it. Every little thing that happens to livestock, especially livestock dying, is now attributed to those wolves, even though there's no direct proof of them being involved. But just because the idea exists that those wolves are around means for some people that they are everywhere. It could be the same with Kludde. At one time, he, or the creature that he represents, was around, a creature of flesh and blood, a sort of animal that we didn't immediately recognize. And fear of that creature spread farther than it actually roamed, based solely on its infamy, and thus Kludde was seen everywhere, while his reach was rather limited. But such theories fail to account for Kludde's shapeshifting abilities, or his vocal mimicry, or human disguise. They also ignore the lack of any consistent physical evidence. But for some, the idea that something lived in the trees, under the bridges, in the reeds on the waterfront remains tantalizing and the most likely. The fifth theory is that Kludde is a cultural memory of violence. It's quieter and darker, but Kludde is not a monster in this one. It's a memory, a lingering echo of human violence, an emotion made flesh. The lowlands of what is now Belgium have long been a contested frontier, a buffer zone between empires, kingdoms and ideologies. Roman legions marched through here, Franks and Burgundians warred over it, Habsburgs, French monarchs, Spanish kings all laid claim to its soil. Even in more recent centuries, the region was scarred by Napoleonic troops, roving deserters or brutal conscriptions. And always, the common folk, peasants, farmers and travelers just walked the roads between these shifting borders. In such a place, violence became part of the landscape. Bandits prowled the roads, soldiers requisitioned homes, and violations of the body and spirit occurred far too often. But in a deeply Catholic and tightly knit rural culture such as in Flanders, such acts were rarely spoken of directly, especially when they touched on sexual violence, abuse, or trauma too heavy to name. So when someone has experienced this trauma, it is referred to as Kludde, because then people know something indescribable has happened to someone. In this respect, it resembles a cryptid from the other side of the world. In Japan, there is a yokai who's made up of the remains of the vengeful dead, the mistreated, and the victims of famine and war. This yokai, or evil spirit, is called the Gashadokuro and takes on the form of a giant skeleton made up of different corpses and skeletons. The Gashadokuro is the embodiment of the raw emotion of those who have died because of the folly and negligence of others and have gathered into a form to exact their revenge on the living. It often resides in places of great death and suffering. And so perhaps Kludde came along. He's a shapeless predator after all, a being that waits in silence, then leaps onto your back and rides you down until you collapse. A tormentor that grows heavier the longer he clings to you. One that cannot be seen, only felt. One that makes the victim walk on in shame and silence, unable to explain the bruises that they carry, the weight on their shoulders, the fear they experience. In this reading, Kludde is not an actual demon, but a symbolic cloak worn by the victim. Something the village could name and fear, point at, while hiding the unspoken truths beneath. He was the story they told when someone came home changed after a war or a conflict, or didn't come home at all. The folklore equivalent of locking the door and looking away. The chain that Kludde wears is not a divine punishment in this reading, but the echo of a captivity. The weight on the back is not supernatural, it is the burden of trauma. The claw marks and the bruises and the silence that people bring with them, they are real. They just needed a name for it, so the people gave it one. Finally, this is the most obvious and down-to-earth theory, is the idea that Kludde is a cautionary tale. Think about it. In the rural region of Flanders and southern Brabant, you have kilometers upon kilometers of forested or swampy road. There's not a lot of oversight in those places. And children and youngsters are helping out with their parents on the farms or in the workshops, but are also often used to run errands. Now, when they're on the road, to prevent them from lingering too long after dark or straying into the moors or falling into the different waterways, parents tell them the stories of Kludde. They use scare tactics to create a lingering fear to make sure that their children are wary of the dangers of being out at night, with poor visibility in a terrain that could easily swallow them, sometimes literally. We see that cautionary tales meant to scare children away from danger often transform into larger-than-life myths. Think of all the cryptids, ghosts and monsters that haunt forests and waterways that focus on children, and you'll find that it's easy to see a pattern. For example, in Mexico, La Llorona is a female ghost who drowns kids, so best not get too close to the water if you're alone. The big bad wolf from Grimm's fairy tales eats children, so best not go into the forest alone or go along with strangers. The fairy folk might abduct you if you stray too far. There's a monster in that lake that'll snatch you right up. History's full of cautionary tales involving monsters, and they're told all to protect the innocent from meeting an untimely end. Now, in addition to that, and this is my personal interpretation, Kludde is also a very convenient excuse to use. Imagine this. You're a hard-working Flemish farmer. You've woken up before the crack of dawn for weeks to work in the fields with your cows, whatever. Your back aches, your hands are sore, and your wife's being a bit of a nag. And your prodigious offspring won't leave you alone with your thoughts for just a minute. At a certain point, you have to go to a nearby village or even beyond that for an errand. You decide to take that upon yourself because of the distance. But your wife's already nagging again that you'll have to be back before dusk, since tomorrow at dawn you'll have to milk the cows again, blah blah blah. At that point, you're just happy to get out of the house as quickly as possible. Now, some of you might be clutching their pearls already, but this setting is basically the golden standard for every literary story ever that takes place in Flanders, trust me. We can't imagine ourselves happy even if we tried. Now, you, as a Flemish farmer, make your way over to your errand. On the way, you encounter some of your friends or family members, people you've not seen in ages, apart from during the obligatory church meetings on holidays. You start talking, and it's good to be among people again who seemingly appreciate you. And you decide to meet up after you've run your errand for a pint. 1 pint becomes 2 pints, 2 pints become 3 pints, and 3 pints become a lot of pints. And before you know it, the sun has set, the moon's bright in the sky, fog chokes the fields, and you can't walk straight anymore. Someone makes an off remark about how late it's getting, and you suddenly realize that you're in deep shit if you don't make it home ASAP. Struggling to even stay upright because of the fatigue and the alcohol at this point, you hurry towards your farm. Thinking it wise to take a shortcut, because at this point every stupid idea seems wise, you decide to cross through some fields and moors. You subsequently bump into some trees, struggle with uneven footing, slip and fall into a small creek, get caught in some brambles tearing up your clothing, and hurl yourself over a fence or two. Now, by the time you sneak back into your house, you look like you've been through hell, and you fought a bear or two on the way through there. Your wife, who is mad with worry, asks what happened, and you, quick thinker under pressure and inebriation that you are, slurs loudly that it was Kludde. The next morning, your children see how bruised and haggard you look. Even more so than when you get home, possibly because your wife smelt the alcohol on your breath the night before and put 2 and 2 together, beating the shit out of you for lying and dodging your responsibilities. The children then ask, "What happened to your dad?" And before you can answer, your wife interjects with a venomous, "It was Kludde, right, honey?" The legend of Kludde endures not through books or broadcasts, but through quiet repetition. In the hush of taverns, in the warnings of elders, in the half-serious jokes traded between children on foggy evenings. He is not a creature that shouts his presence into the world. He murmurs it. He clinks it, one rusty chain link at a time. And perhaps that's why he survives. In a world increasingly obsessed with proof, with high-resolution footage and GPS-tracked phenomena, Kludde remains resolutely unprovable. He leaves no trail but some bruises, no mark but fear. He thrives not in places of high strangeness or cosmic scale, but in the deeply local, in the folds of a worn path, in stillness beneath a willow tree, in the shadow in the corner of your eye as you walk alone and hear just one footfall too many. For the people of Flanders, he is part of the landscape. His name is etched into hiking trails, echoed in folklore festivals, nodded to in metal songs even, and laughed at in comic books. And yet, behind these nods and winks lies something colder, something older. The knowledge that no matter how modern the world becomes, the road home at night can still feel like a test of spirit. We don't know why he wears his chain. We don't know why he chooses some and not others. We don't know what he is. But we know what he does. He waits. He follows. He rides. And when dawn breaks, or death comes, he's gone again. So, if you ever walk alone through the misted fields of Flanders, if ever you hear something flapping above the rooftop or clattering sound behind you on a bridge, do not stop. Do not turn. And above all, do not pity the black cat in the ditch, no matter how it cries. Because if you carry him once, you may never walk without him again. And he is heavy. If you found this exploration of Kludde's legend compelling, and you enjoy thoughtful dives into folklore, cryptids, and forgotten mysteries, consider supporting the channel. A like helps more than you think, and subscribing keeps you close to the next strange story. And your comments, especially if you've heard a version of this tale yourself, are always welcome. And again, Thank you for watching Mythos Insights. Until next time, keep your lantern close and listen carefully for chains in the dark.